Hi, my name is Michael Orr. I'm the preaching minister at the Saginaw Church of Christ in Saginaw, Texas. And I'm here today to talk to you about reaching young families in the Lord and being able to bring young families from your community into the church. And it's an important topic because a lot of congregations, and maybe yours is one of them, is looking around and seeing gray heads, but not a lot of young people, not a lot of children. And it's a problem all across the United States where churches are dying out slowly because they're not attracting young adults to their congregation. And the problem isn't one of those things that can be fixed with a neat program or something that you can just sort of implement and everything gets better. Being able to reach out to young couples, young families in the community, and when they come and visit church is a problem a lot of congregations face. And it's something that a lot of them throw up their hands. They say, we don't know how to do that. We don't know what to do. A lot of the thought is, well, let's make worship different. Let's make the building nice and different. And I think people miss the point of why young families are not attracted to the church, why they're not coming to our congregations and being a part, and why we're not reaching out to young families enough or effectively to be able to bring them here. And one of the things I want you to think about is that when God set up his church, one of the things that he did is he set up the church to be a family unit of older and younger. Titus talks about this in several other places in the pastoral letters, where the older is to teach the younger, the older women to teach the younger women, the older men, the younger men. And in the book of First John, we see this specifically laid out. In First John 2:12 through 17, we see John, who was very much sort of a father in the church, and he talks to them about being little children. And he understood this idea of mentoring very well. He says in verse 12 of First John 2, I write to you, little children, because your sins are forgiven you for his name's sake. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you have overcome the wicked one. I write to you, little children, because you have known the Father. I have written to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I have written to you, young men, because you are strong and the word of God abides in you, and you have overcome the wicked one. And then he gives sort of an idea of how to connect with the problems and the issues of young couples and young adults in this day and age. It says this, verse 15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. And so you look at that and you say, well, how does that apply to reaching young families and young adults in the community? And the answer to that is to look at the nature of the church and how we're interacting with our community and how we're interacting with young adults. Imagine this, that a young family comes to town. They're looking for a church home. So the first thing they do is they go to the internet and they start looking up churches in the area. Which church is going to be a good fit for their family? They're looking for certain things, but what are they looking for? Well, one of the things we need to understand when we're reaching out to young adults and young families is that young adults come to church looking for something. They're not just looking for a church to worship at. There was a time and place when everybody did that. They're looking for something more for their families. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for support. They're looking for a family. They're looking for people who are going to help them raise their children if they have children, to help them to have better marriages, to help them overcome their struggles and their sin problems. From the first time I started preaching, I realized that young adults have a very specific issue that they have to deal with that people who already have children out of the house don't necessarily wrestle with on a daily basis. A lot of young families need to be taught. They need to be trained. They need to be given an understanding of how to deal with life's struggles. A lot of young families have kids that they don't know what to do with them. They're new parents. And it used to be that most parents were going to start out at 23, 24, 26. But now you have parents who are waiting longer and longer to have children. You have people who are entering into what we call young adulthood later on in life. People into their 30s, people in their 40s, waiting to get married, waiting to have kids. All of the things that sort of create maturity and lead them into saying, okay, it's time to look for a church. Those things have been stunted. So even identifying young adults and young couples in our community can be difficult. It can be a challenge. So one of the things we look at is a young adult is a person who needs to be taught and trained and is looking for help in doing that. They're also a person who needs a community. They're looking for a family. And we call ourselves family all the time in the church. We call ourselves family and we say we're a family church. And if you come here, you're going to be treated like family. Does family ignore each other? Does family treat some members better than others? Does family only cater to a certain group and the rest of the family is left out? Because what happens is a lot of times young adults come to churches, but older adults, they don't want to do anything different than what they've done before. They don't think that they have enough teachers for classes, so they don't offer enough classes. They don't deal with the issues that young adults are going through. But most importantly, they want a teacher or an elder or a few elders or a few people to work with young adults and then ignore them. That's not what you can do if you want to reach out to young adults. You have to realize that every member of the church, especially older members, are called to reach out to young adults and mentor them. The art of mentorship. When you look at 1 John 2, you see this idea of mentorship. I write to you, little children. This is John speaking to these young Christians or young men in the faith, women in the faith, because your sins are forgiven. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you've overcome the wicked one. I'll write to you, little children, because you have known the Father. And he goes on and on and on. And so you have this idea that he's writing to these specific groups in an attempt to mentor and teach them about how to be Christians. And then he gives the lesson, so to speak. Do not be conformed to the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And so a lot of young adults are looking for a church where they are going to be treated as family. Now, what is a family? You have fathers, you have mothers, you have brothers and sisters, you have younger brothers, you have older brothers and sisters. The same thing has to be the case in the church. We have to be committed to reaching out to younger men and women in the church and mentoring and teaching and training them. That means that a church has to focus and emphasize teaching as a congregation. So let's say you're a small church and a young couple comes through the doors and they're looking for a church and they want to visit your congregation. Well, first of all, do you have classes for their kids? And what kind of classes do you have for them? I would say at the least you want a class for cradle roll, then a class for preschool, then a class for K through 5th, and then if you have enough, a class for teenagers. If you don't have enough teachers for that, then you have to have the teenagers, of course, in the adult class. And then you want to make sure at that point that those teenagers are receiving attention and you're reaching out to them. But it's best to have a class for teenagers as well. You want to have a class for all ages. If you say we have a class for all ages, that's a good sign for anyone looking for a church. If they're a young adult, they want to know that there's a congregation where their kids are going to be raised and they're going to be able to be taught and mentored and trained from the beginning. They want mentoring for their kids. They want their kids to have spiritual mentoring. Same thing with young adults. They're looking for classes where they can learn how to be a married couple. They're looking for classes where they can be challenged spiritually where they are. They're looking for classes that are going to deal with where they are right now. If you don't have a lot of young adults, that's okay, but you still need to reach out to them. And if you don't have enough for an extra class, make sure that the classes that you do have aren't simply textual classes, that you're having classes that are dealing with the things that John is talking about, that you have classes that deal with spiritual sin, that you have classes that deal with marriage. Just look at the teachings of Jesus. Jesus was very topical in a lot of his sermons and a lot of his teachings. He had things that dealt with judgment. He had things that dealt with adultery. He had things that dealt with divorce. He had all sorts of teaching. And so you could focus on the teachings of Jesus and how they affect us today, how they affect our marriages, how they affect our raising of children. There's so much in the Bible about raising kids. So make the things that you're talking about relevant. A study on the book of Acts is fine, but you don't want that to be the only thing that young adults are learning. When I first arrived at Saginaw, the first thing I wanted to do, because I noticed they didn't have one, was to have a young adult class. And so after the first week, we had a young adult class, and we had whatever young adults we had there meeting together, forming a group, because they need people who are their age to be able to make friends, to support each other. But you say, but we don't have any young adults. Okay, that's fine. The first thing you have to do is say, why aren't we reaching out to young adults? Why aren't we connecting with young adults? Well, there's a couple of things that we need to know. First of all, if you want young adults, if you have classes for all ages, that's important. And do what you can to have those classes. We have something called Promised Land for K through 5th, where we rotate classes, and we're on the same subject for 7 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever we do, but it's different classes. One of them is PC to BC, and it does teaches through computers, teaches the Bible story through computers. The same lesson is taught doing Jump for Joy, which is just singing and learning about God through worship and teaching them about worship songs and things like that. There's another one that talks about science, and it's called Solomon's Study. Another one, Abraham's Tent, where you dress up in costume. There's another where we do Creation Station, and that's where they use cooking and other kinds of crafts to teach the lesson. True Theater, where you use puppets and you use drama and you use videos to be able to teach. Those kinds of things allow you to bring in more kids programs and teach them. You want to emphasize the quality of the classes that you present. You don't just want to give them coloring sheets and say, oh, here, we'll throw a bone at them and that way they'll come. You want to emphasize having good, solid Bible classes for all ages. If you don't have that, even if you attract young adults, they're not going to stay because they want classes for their kids. You don't want to grab a young couple and immediately start putting them to work to the point where you wear them out. It's a bad idea. Do you want to get them involved? Yes, but don't overwhelm them. Don't just see them as a way to find more workers so you can sit back and not do anything. Make sure that it's a welcoming place for them to be. A couple of ways to do that. Make sure that you have a web presence as a congregation. Young adults are going to look at your website if you have one. And if the website is not up to date, if it's not well kept and maintained, they're going to go, well, I don't think this church is really active. I don't know if I want to be here. They're going to look, before they ever go through the doors, they're going to look at whether or not you're a congregation that they want to be at. Another thing you want to look at with a website, it's easy to have one. Just get on Facebook and make a Facebook group and make it your congregation. Say, go to so-and-so. A website is good too, and it's helpful if you have a website, but also have a Facebook group. You can make an open group and a closed group, and that way, the open group, you can connect with people. If you have the means, then record your lessons, put them online, show them to those who might be interested in seeing what you're about. Let them have a preview. These young people, they want to know, what are you about before they are engaged in your congregation. Make sure and put news announcements and things that you're doing. Another thing young adults are looking for is, how are you involved in the community? Are you reaching out to people? Do you care about people? Those are all important things to young adults. They want to know, do you care about other people, or do you just care about yourselves? That leads us to, when you have a young family that comes to your church, what do you do? Well, one of the things that you must do is you must greet them at the door. Now, you might say, well, that's for everybody. You need to greet people at the door, especially young adults. They want to know. They're going to make a decision in the first 30 seconds of seeing the congregation. Is this a congregation where I am going to be loved and taken care of? Is this a congregation I can entrust my family with, that they're going to love and care for my family? That's an important question. I write to you fathers. I write to you young men. John understood that these different groups, Titus understood that these different groups had different needs. Older women, teach younger women to be chaste. Teach them how to be good homemakers and take care of their families and other things. These kinds of things were written in the Bible 2,000 years ago because they understood that young families and older Christians had different needs, and you had to meet those needs in a meaningful way. So education comes first, but then how do you look? How do you present yourself as a congregation to young adults? How do they look on your web presence, whether it's your website if you don't have one? They're easy to get. You just need to kind of look a little bit and find a good one, and find something that's easy to update. Make sure it's updated. Don't leave something from October of 2014 on your website, right? Make sure that it's relevant and it's something that's going on right now. And then have something on your Facebook page. I know that it can be hard to deal with media these days. Hopefully the situation we had last year will teach us a little bit about being able to connect more digitally. But young adults definitely are going to be looking at your website, definitely looking at your content. It doesn't have to be the fanciest website in the world. It needs to be simple. It needs to tell them the information that they need to hear. That's going to draw them in if they're looking for a church home. Also, make sure if you have a sign, if you have a church sign, don't put something that's just going to be sort of cliche. Say young adult classes, classes for all ages, something that's going to actually bring them to the building. And beyond that, find your neighbors, find young adults in the area who are looking for a church home. There's a lot of them that when they have kids, especially, they're looking somewhere to take their kids. Be an open congregation that's willing to receive kids. And so these are some of the things you can think about on the onset. Also, what does your building look like? If a young adult comes into your building and it's sort of musty and everything's sort of disheveled, or if the classrooms look like they belong in the 1970s, it's going to be a hard sell for people. You say, well, that's not fair. It shouldn't be about appearance. It's about coming and worshiping God. We understand that. But they don't know this. When you have young adults who come and try out a congregation, they have no idea about these things. They're wanting to know, do you care about your building? Do you? And because if you don't care about your building, you don't care about how people perceive you. You don't care about the things that God's entrusted you with. Make sure that your building looks decent. It doesn't have to be the greatest building in the world. It just has to be inviting. It has to be something that when people come in, they say, oh, wow, they really care about their building. Have a welcome desk. They're not that expensive to buy, but have a central place where you can send people. The kids who come, you have someone there who's going to greet them and who's going to take them to their class, make them feel welcome. Don't make them have to wander around looking for somebody to ask questions. Have someone at the door asking questions. If a young adult family comes, make sure and get to know them. It doesn't matter if you have young adults already. Invite them to lunch, or invite them to an event that you have, a luncheon or something. A lot of young adults are eager to find a congregation that's going to welcome them in and embrace them and care about them. That they don't just want somewhere to worship, they want somewhere to invest their family into. Is that always the case? No. But so many times that's what young adults are looking for. They want a place to belong just like anybody else. And you don't have to be the biggest church and you don't have to be the nicest church, but you need to be the friendliest church that you can be. You need to take care of your facilities as best you can. You need every member out of the pew before church going and talking to the visitors, going and talking to these young adults, meeting them, encouraging them, just helping them to feel welcome. Don't overwhelm them and make them feel, you can usually tell this through their interactions, but make them feel like they really belong there. That's going to go further than just about anything else in reaching out to young adults. Another thing we want to consider is a lot of young adults are looking for things that you might not offer at a church service, but they're looking for them nonetheless. When we talk about marriages, a lot of young adults struggle in marriage. And if you have a marriage class as a congregation, you advertise it in the paper, you advertise it on your sign, you maybe you do a deal where you pass out flyers that you're having a marriage class, you're having this kids VBS or whatever it is that you're doing. Let them know that there are things going on that involve them, and a lot of them might not come, but if you get one family to come and then they start coming, you've got a group, right? One family is better than no young family. And if you already have young families, then you can bring these new families in and you can get them involved and you can help them form this group. Because don't get offended, young adults need young adult activities. Young adults need young adult time. They need to spend time with people their own age, because they'll form bonds that will last for a very long time. I speak through experience. In Saginaw, we have several young families who are now deacons, some of which have become elders who were a little bit older when I came here. And it works. If you have a group that sticks with it long enough, you continue to bring young families in, you continue to add to your leadership. And by the time that we exit, because all of us will exit someday from this world, we can be sure that there'll be a congregation that outlasts us. So let's look a little bit more at the text. There are some things that young adults really need to hear, that we really need to express to them. Number one, we need to be able to communicate to young adults through our teaching, through our sermons, through online content, that the world is a scary place, but the world does not have the answers. And a lot of young people, they're looking for answers. College age, young married with children, they're looking for answers, and the world does not provide those answers. Some young families are really desperate to get answers about how to raise their kids. And don't be that church that gets mad because the kid is screaming in the back because they don't know what to do and the parents don't know how to teach them. Be the church that helps to raise those kids, that goes back into the room and helps the mother with that child, or offers to help, or encourages the parents. Boy, I know it's tough raising kids. I did it myself. I want you to know I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm so glad that you're working so hard to raise those kids. Be that church that's welcoming, be that church that's encouraging, because this congregation that you're at, it has the answers, because we study the word, because we proclaim and preach the word. We have the answers that young adults are looking for. We have answers about marriage. We have answers about sexual fidelity and about the struggles that young people go through in these times. We have the answers about raising children. We have the answers about how to mature and grow in Christ. So we need to consider that the message is that the world is a scary place, but God has the answers, and he's provided them through his word. And when we come together, we help to answer those questions. Another thing is that the things that we struggle with, we can overcome. Look at the three things he mentions here. He says, for all that is in the world, verse 16, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Again, this is 1 John 2, verse 16, is not of the Father, but is of the world. He says these things really sum up all that a young adult is going to struggle with, whether it be the fleshly desires or the anger that they might have, the frustration that they have in marriage or raising kids, the struggles they have with money and life. All of these, the lust of the flesh, the desires of the flesh that we face, even though these things are a problem and are an issue, they do have a solution, right? And it's not to give into these things. The lust of the eyes, our desires, our wants, our the things that we think we need so much about. To teach young families that you don't need the big house and the big job and all of these things to find joy and peace. You need to keep your eyes on Christ, and keep your eyes on being a loving and godly family. And then he says the pride of life. And a lot of young adults, they want a church that's humble. They don't want a church that says, Well, all these other sinners, they're just terrible and awful, and the world's awful. They want people who are humble, who admit their sin and guilt. We need to be a congregation that's willing to openly say we struggle, and here are our struggles, but we know that God can overcome those things. And so there are these problems that we have in life, but there is a solution, and Christ gives us a solution. So the first thing is, the world is a scary place, but the church is a place where they're safe. The church is a place where they can have answers. And these struggles are a problem, but there is a solution, and that's Christ and the church. And then the last thing is, the things of this life will pass, but those who look to God will endure. And it's a very powerful message, right? He says, those who do the will of God abide forever. So many young families are worried about the future. They're worried about what's going to happen to their kids. They're worried about their marriage. They're worried about life. All the things we've been going through the past year. They're worried about what's going to happen with all of these things. And the thing is, the world is not permanent. The world doesn't last. We need to give a message to young families that even though the world around us may seem to be falling apart, those who do God's will, they will abide. They will make it. You're going to make it. You're going to succeed. So we need to give them that message. We need to give them that message through our classes. We need to give them that message through our sermons. We need to give them that message through our interactions with them. We need mentoring. We need older members to reach out to younger members to encourage them. We need older folks to invite younger folks. Invite your kids, right? If you have adult age kids in the area, oh, they haven't been to church in years. Well, get them to come to church. Encourage them to come back. Don't give up on them. Bring them in, or work with the families of the members whose children are not faithful, and bring them back and teach them and encourage them. A lot of times they just don't give a church a chance because they don't know, hey, we really do have things to offer for you. It's not simply the church that you grew up with. This congregation wants to help young adults, be a young adult friendly church, and reach out in different ways through community projects, through neighborhoods. Invite that young couple that's just moved in across the street to church. Invite them to a Bible study. A lot of times, if you have them over at your home, you're much more likely to bring them to the Lord than if you just invite them to church. And above all, we need to teach. Be a teaching congregation. Be a congregation where everyone is a teacher, everyone is a mentor, and we encourage one another and we strengthen one another. We love one another. And when somebody walks in that door and they're a young adult, or when we interact with a young adult in the community, we make them feel like this is a place where they're welcome. This is a place where they're loved. This is a place where their children will learn. This is a place where they will learn. Like John says, who talked about fathers and young men who have overcome the wicked one, who have learned, whose sins are forgiven. All of these things I have written to you, he says. We need to be an instructional, encouraging church who thinks about the needs of today's young adults and responds in ways that says, we care about you, we want you here, you're special, you're important. And God will provide the increase. Don't give up. Don't be discouraged. I know sometimes it's hard. God brought a couple of young adults into our congregation many years ago. We didn't have a lot when we started, but now we have probably over half of our congregation, young adults, the voices of children, of babies. And it's because God did it. And God helped us to see we needed to reach out to these young people and find ways to be relevant to them, to teach them, to teach their children, to emphasize those things. If you do these things, God will do the rest. So God bless you. I hope and pray that your congregation will be able to reach young adults in your community, will be able to reach young adults who come through the doors, that you'll be able to tell them, this is a place where you belong. This is a place where you'll be loved. And like John, we'll encourage them and mentor them and teach them so that they'll be able to be a part of your congregation. God bless you. God be with you. And I hope to see you someday.